Why CISA's censorship and election interference work is the most insidious attack on American democracy. Um, I have to hand it. I have to hand it to the Biden administration. He he is not afraid to censor anyone that is against him. We know that we seen how they used to work hand in hand with Twitter before Elon, and we know what's been going on with YouTube and Facebook and things, and how they censor anything that's against Biden. They don't want it. Anything that calls him out on his bull crap. You know, we saw it with the Hunter Biden laptop and how they censored that. So they're going to try to do something to interfere. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But before we get started, go ahead and hit that like button, share this out so we can get this information out there. Subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. And hit that alarm bell so you know when I'm putting out new stuff. Also, check out my link tree in the description. It has a link to my Patreon where I talk about things I can't talk about here. There's also a link to my Instagram and my merch store. Also, check out jjthepsychotherapist.com for news as well. All right, let's talk about this news. Now, this comes from the Federalist, MD Kittle, and they report that CISA censorship of state-defined disinformation is a psychological operation against the American people that is as bad as it gets, Warner told the Federalist. And I agree. It's basically government control. So government can't flat out censor what you say. So they use an in round. They go and tell these tech companies to do their bidding for them. That should be illegal. There needs to be some type of legislation to prevent government from doing that. That's not right. That's another way of censoring what you say. But the article says that West Virginia Secretary of State Mac Warner last month eviscerated the Big Brother censorship operation known as the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. Quote, when we have our own federal agency lying to the American people, that's the most insidious thing that we can do in elections. The election integrity champion told officials from the FBI and CISA on a panel at the winter meeting of the National Association of Secretaries, or NAS, in Washington, D.C., according to Wired Eric Geller. While Geller did his best to defend the federal agency under the suggestive headline, How a Right-Wing Controversy Could Sabotage U.S. Election Security. Wow, they are reaching. Its history of censorship and election interference validate Warner's concern. The agency's work, particularly the extracurricular business CISA has conducted in recent years, has been rightly criticized for its massive overreach. A report released last fall by the House Judiciary Committee and the Select Committee on Weaponization of the Federal Government details just how CISA, quote, colluded with big tech and disinformation partners to censor Americans. Again, this should be illegal. Although the investigation is ongoing, information obtained to date has revealed that the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency, an upstart agency within the Department of Homeland Security, has facilitated the censorship of Americans directly and through third-party intermediaries, the congressional report states. The report goes on to assert that the shadowy agency has metastasized into the nerve center of the federal government, domestic surveillance, and censorship operations on social media. All right, so platforms have got to get more comfortable with government. Launched in 2018, CISA has supposed to be a, quote, auxiliary agency designed to protect critical infrastructure and guard against cybersecurity threats, the report notes. By 2020, the agency was routinely targeting what CISA officials claimed to be disinformation on social media. A year later, the agency had established a formal team devoted to what it decided was misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, the latter of which CISA defines as information based on fact, but used out of context to mislead, harm, or manipulate. In other words, factual information that is problematic to the Biden regime. Exactly. That's exactly what it is. So if you state the fact that Hunter Biden laptop was real, and is grounds for dismissal of Biden being elected as president. Of course, they're going to come out during the election and say, "Hey, um, this is misinformation." And remember, we had um, Intel agents come out and sign a letter saying that it was Russian disinformation. So, who gets to decide what's true or not? Because the government has lied to us time and time again and continue to do so when we're supposed to take it on face value when they say something is misinformation or disinformation or malinformation. But CISA's parent agency, DHS, launched the much ridiculed and ultimately disbanded Disinformation Governance Board in 2022 to streamline the work of colluding with social media providers to shut down speech the government didn't like or found inconvenient. And you know, I've ridiculed them. I talked trash about the Disinformation Governance Board and was so happy that they scrapped it. But they're coming again. They're coming under a different name. But a federal lawsuit filed by then Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt, now a U.S. Senator, uncovered troubling conversations between the Biden administration and private companies about the pathways for removing information the government deemed false or misleading. A federal judge in a ruling last year barred the Biden administration from its censorship work, although the U.S. Supreme Court stayed the injunction when it took up the case. The leaked documents obtained by The Intercept show that Microsoft executive and former DHS official Matt Masterson texted CISA director Jen Easterly in February 2022 saying, quote, "Platforms have got to get comfortable with government. It's really interesting how hesitant they remain." Because we have a First Amendment right and these platforms know that. But it seems big tech was getting pretty comfortable with the Biden administration's puppet enforcer. The Intercept report showed, among other alarming revelations, that Facebook operated a portal where Homeland Security could report allegations of disinformation. This is so dirty. And CISA also has worked in concert with the Election Integrity Partnership and Virality Project, which is accused of conspiring with state, local, and federal government officials to trample the First Amendment rights of social media users, according to a class action lawsuit. Quote, "But the EIP did not act alone. In fact, the EIP was created in consultation with the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, with the idea that the EIP allegedly originating from CISA interns who were Stanford students," the Federalist senior legal correspondent Margaret Cleveland wrote in May. Just deceit on top of deceit on top of deceit. So these were interns that worked for the federal government that created this thing, and they try to say, hey, so this is not a government entity here, even though these people worked for the government at prior to creating this entity. These people, they're slick. They slick. Only a matter of time. Facing more public outrage over its unconstitutional actions, the CISA audaciously insisted it merely plays an informational role. So why do these companies even comply then, if that's the case? But as the congressional report notes, CISA is, quote, "working with federal partners to mature a whole of government approach to curbing alleged misinformation and disinformation." Again, that is not the government's job. Freedom of speech is freedom of speech. It doesn't matter. You have the right to misinform if you like, and you have the right to disinform if you like. But we know most of the time, I would say upwards of 90% of the time, what they call misinformation, the disinformation, is actually truth that they're just trying to hide from the American public. But CISA considered the creation of an anti-misinformation rapid response team capable of physically deploying across the United States. You can't make this up. CISA moved its censorship operation to a CISA-funded nonprofit after CISA and the Biden administration were sued in federal court, implicitly admitting that its censorship activities are unconstitutional. CISA wanted to use the same CISA-funded nonprofit as its mouthpiece to avoid the appearance of government propaganda. We all know where this stuff is coming from. It's coming from the Biden administration. Again, this should be illegal. But the agency advisory committee, according to the report, worried that it would be, quote, "only a matter of time before someone realizes we exist and starts asking about our work." So why is that a problem? So if everything is above board, why is that a problem? Why are you trying to do this in secrecy? Incidentally, the advisory committee created a quote protecting critical infrastructure from misinformation and disinformation subcommittee whose members included BJ Gad, or however you pronounce that name, Twitter's former chief legal officer who was involved in censoring the New York Post Hunter Biden laptop um, story, and Gaddy was also quote behind the decision to permanently ban former President Trump from Twitter. And thank goodness she's no longer in Twitter. Of course, she would work for a censorship committee, right? A most insidious attack on American democracy. Now, Geller's Wired piece took an aim at Warner, West Virginia's outspoken Secretary of State, who is making a run for governor. At last month's Secretaries of the State meeting, Warner lambasted CISA and FBI officials for, quote, what he said was their agency scheme to suppress the truth about U.S. President Joe Biden's son, Hunter, during the 2020 election, and then covered their tracks. Geller wrote as if is not privy to the same public documents and testimony confirming Warner's assertion. In Geller's account, the FBI was merely advising Twitter and Facebook to be on the lookout for Russian disinformation. We've seen the emails. We know that's a lie. They did more than just advise. They told them to censor this stuff. But how do you square the intelligence community's advisory role after learning Joe Biden's 2020 campaign prompted a former acting CIA director to, quote, help Biden by leading 50 colleagues to sign a letter spreading the false claim that damning emails from Hunter Biden's laptop published by the New York Post were Russian disinformation, and all of that just weeks before the election. Perhaps not surprisingly, the FBI and CISA officials did not respond to Warner's charges, and the meeting quickly went on. Geller reported before he quickly attempted to establish Warner as a dreaded election denier, noting that the Secretary of State attended an election denier rally after Biden's 2020 victory. So of course, they're going to try to discredit. But Warner is no conspiracy theorist. The West Point graduate served nearly a quarter century in the U.S. Army and then worked with the State Department in Afghanistan, according to his bio. Warner knows about security threats. CISA's activities were, quote, the most insidious attack on American democracy that I know of in U.S. history, Warner told the Federalist in an interview last week. He called the targeting and censoring of state-defined disinformation a psychological operation against the American people that is as bad as it gets. I agree. It's psychological warfare. Warner said he has spoken to CISA officials multiple times, but that they have yet to heed his calls for an after-action report on the 2020 election to truly find out what went right and what went wrong. Of course they wouldn't. Warning. It appears most state election officials don't want to deal with the actual threat of the Biden administration's disinformation and political silence and campaign. Quote, they know they will be lambasted by the mainstream press. Warner said, no one wants to be hit with the election denier label so effectively applied by the accomplished media. It's not easy, not politically expedient for them. Warner is one of the few speaking out against CISA and pulling away from involvement with the agency, but Geller worries Warner's conservative colleagues will join him in breaking ties with CISA. I hope so, as conservatives in Congress work to cut the budget of the abusive agency. Thank goodness. Quote, it remains unclear how many of Warner's colleagues agree with him, but when Wired surveyed the other 23 Republican secretaries who oversee elections in the state, several of them said they would continue working with CISA, Geller wrote. But others who praised CISA's support also sounded notes of caution, he added. They need only look at CISA's record as its rhetoric in agency's brief existence to know that Warner's warning aren't merely the stuff of a right-wing controversy. One could argue we're in the business of critical infrastructure, and the most critical infrastructure is our cognitive infrastructure. So building that resilience to misinformation and disinformation, I think, is incredibly important, CISA Director Jen Easterly said at the 2021 Rewired conference. Apparently, running roughly over the First Amendment isn't warning enough. Again, I don't understand how the Biden administration gets away with this. We have a First Amendment right. The government have no role in telling um, platforms what they can and what they can't allow on their platforms. But let me know what you think. Leave your comments down below. Like, share, and subscribe, and check out jjthepsychotherapist.com for the latest news. Until next time, peace.